So last time we talked about the alliance that Orgetorix formed with his pals from the neighboring tribes, Casticus on the one hand and Dunorix on the other, and they have all conspired to sort of take over all of Gaul. And if you remember from last time, Orgetorix has kind of sold this migration of his own people, the Helvetians, to the Helvetians themselves as sort of a, hey, we're sort of landlocked and we like to fight a little bit. Maybe we should just kind of like branch out and settle somewhere else that's a little more open geographically. But really he has these plans of trying to take over most of Gaul. So how does 1.4 begin? It begins with this: Ea res est Helvetiis per indicium enuntiata. Ea res est Helvetiis per indicium enuntiata. So let's start. No clauses that I see, but I do see a prepositional phrase in per indicium. Okay, now let's go on to verbs. Our verb here is est. And what about nominative? Anything look nominative? Ea and res. And also the word enuntiata, sorry about that, is also derived here. And this is a participle coming from a verb enuntio. So here it is. And notice how est is really far away from enuntiata. We're going to translate est here in the present tense, as opposed to translating it as a perfect passive main verb. And I know that may sound kind of weird, because, hey, when you take the fourth part of the verb and you have sum es est, sumus estis, or sunt after it, isn't it always has or have been verbed? And the answer is yes, normally, if the words are next to each other. But I'll remind you, if we go all the way back to just the first four words of the whole work, Gallia est omnis divisa, he's saying Gaul is, or all of Gaul is divided, as opposed to all of Gaul has been divided. So if Caesar wanted to say has been divided, he would have said divisa est. And similarly, in chapter 4 here, if he had wanted to say has been announced, he would have said enuntiata est. But instead, he says est enuntiata, meaning is reported, or is declared, or is disclosed. So, what is disclosed? Ea res, this thing, literally, meaning the fact that Orgetorix was kind of planning something else. This thing is disclosed to the Helvetians per indicium, which means through an informer. Dun dun dun. Moving on. Mordibus suis Orgetorigem ex vinculis capsam dicere coegerunt, damnatum poenam sequi oportebat, ut igni cremaretur. Once again, mordibus suis Orgetorigem ex vinculis causam dicere coegerunt, damnatum poenam sequi oportebat, ut igni cremaretur. All right, do we see any clauses? And I see one, and it's down here at the very end of the sentence. Prepositional phrases. Moving back earlier in the sentence, we have ex vinculis, and I think that's it. So let's talk about verbs. Where do we see verbs? Our first verb that we come to, our first main verb is coegerunt, and then our next one would be oportebat. And then there is a verb inside the clause, and that would be cremaretur, imperfect subjunctive there. There are a couple of infinitives, and one is dicere, and the other is sequi. Okay. Now, who is the subject of coegerunt? Notice that it's erunt, so it's they. We don't actually have any nominative words here. So the subject would be the Helvetians. Now, what about the subject of oportebat? Well, that's one of those impersonal verbs, so it is always the subject. and then we'll talk more about who's the subject of cremaretur once we get there. How about any accusative words? Because we already mentioned there are no nominative words, it seems. So let's talk about accusative words. It looks like we have orgetorigem is an accusative word here. And poenam. And actually damnatum is as well. And also calsam. So, any ablative words? The answer is yes. The last case is the ablative. Eoi isis ibus, so moribus suis, right here. Those words are ablative. And the word igni down here is also ablative. Remember, I think I mentioned this in an earlier video. Sometimes, because you're probably looking at the letter I and thinking, but wait, A-O-E, is ibus, isn't the third declension ablative singular ending the letter E? And the answer is yes for most third declension nouns, but there are some where the ablative singular is actually the letter I. And if you really, really want to know more about that, you can ask me when I return, sometime after class or after school when I have a very long time to explain something to you. It's like this whole separate set of nouns called I-stem nouns, but if you just prefer, just know that the letter I is an alternate ablative singular ending for third declension nouns, and just leave it at that. Alright, so now that we've drawn our roadmap, we know the subject is the Helvetians. Let's do this. They forced Orgetorix. Dicere causam is an idiom in Latin. It means to plead a case. They forced Orgetorix to plead his case from chains or in chains. Now, moribus suis, those words are ablative. And I think that Hans Friedrich gives you some kind of note on that. I can't remember for sure. But it basically means like by their own customs or according to their own customs or with respect to their own customs, something like that. They forced Orgetorix to plead his case literally out of chains, but that doesn't make any sense, meaning from chains or in chains. So they've arrested him. And now what's going to happen to him? Well, presumably they have arrested him because he lied to them. And then oportebat, we know means it was necessary. And this is where this is where his punishment is described if he is found guilty. It was necessary that punishment follow him implied having been condemned. Has he been condemned yet? No. But in other words, if he is condemned, it's necessary that that punishment follow him, that he be cremaretured by igni, that he be burned by fire. Dun dun dun. So, if he is found guilty, they're going to burn him alive. Oh boy. Now the day of the trial approaches, and we've got a long sentence. Die constituta causae dictionis orgetorix ad judicium omnem suam familiam ad hominum milia decem undique coegit, et omnes clientes obaeratosque suos quorum magnum numerum habebat eodum conduxit. Per eos ne causam diceret se eripuit. Die constituta causae dictionis orgetorix ad judicium omnem suam familiam ad hominum milia decem undique coegit, et omnes clientes ob aeratosque suos quorum magnum numerum habebat eodum conduxit. Per eos ne causam diceret se eripuit. So that's a huge sentence. Let's try and break it apart a little bit more. Do we see any clauses? And it looks like there are some. Our first one seems to be right here at quorum and ending at habebat. And then we have another one, we have this ne clause, ut or ne, and it probably ends here at the subjunctive verb. I don't see any other clauses, but there are some prepositional phrases as well. Where's our first one? Is here, ad judicium, and then we have ad milia decem. Hominum is technically genitive plural, but you know what? We'll just sort of include it in the whole phrase. And I think, there's one more here, per eos. Yet another prepositional phrase. Okay, so let's talk about verbs now. We're going to transition over to Verb Town, Verbville. And where do we see our verbs? Moving along. First one is coegit. And inside of this relative clause, we have habebat. And then another main verb of the entire sentence would be conduxit. Inside the ne clause, we have diceret. And then finally, ripuit is another main verb of the whole sentence. Who's the subject of coegit and also conduxit and ripuit? Well, who looks nominative? That would be our old pal, Orgetorix. There he is. And I don't think that there are any other nominative words here. Let's talk about accusative words, possible direct objects that we see. We have omnem suam familiam, omnes clientes, ob aeratos que suos. Now, some of you might be thinking omnes clientes, that yes, hey, can't that be nominative plural and accusative plural? So how do you know it's accusative plural? Well, because I'm looking at my verb conduxit, and conduxit is singular, so therefore omnes clientes cannot be it can't be nominative plural, because obviously our nouns and verbs have to agree in number. The only other accusative I see magnum numerum here, and I think that is it. Okay, are there any ablative words that we see? And the answer is yes, die constituta. And let's see, anything else? Might be just about it. I think we could probably figure out the rest. So then it just becomes an issue of vocabulary. We've drawn our roadmap. We know who our subject is. We know where our first main verb is. So let's get to it. Die constituta, I think Hans Friedrich tells you that's an idiom that means on the appointed day. Now he gives you the whole thing. He says on the day set for trying the case. Don't translate it like that, because that's way too free and the AP board will not give that to you. Okay, so this is how it goes. On the appointed day of the pleading of his case. Did we get that? On the appointed day, that's die constituta, of the pleading, dictionis, of the case, calci, Orgetorix. What did he do? He coagited. He forced or compelled to the trial. By the way, that's ad judicium. He forced to the trial omnem suam familiam, his all of his household. And please don't translate familiam as family, because once again they will mark that off. Family is obviously a derivative, but familia is a technical term that means the entire household, meaning not just the members of the immediate family, but also all of the slaves and freedmen who lived in that house or were associated with that house. So that's quite a number of people. So Orgetorix, he forced, or I guess Kogo, we could also say gathered. I think that's a better translation. Orgetorix gathered at the trial all of his household. Ad hominu milia decem. Ad here means about. So about 10,000 men. Wow, that's quite a number of people in his household. And he gathered them undique, which means on all sides. And now we've got to go to conduxit, since that's our next main verb. He assembled or brought together all of his clients and his debtors, of whom he had a great number, eodem, which means to the same place. To the same place. All right? So, and he brought together all of his clients and his debtors, of whom he had a great number, to the same place. Per eos, through them, meaning all of these 10,000 people in his household, plus all of his clients, plus all of his debtors who show up on the day of the trial, which is just insane. Through them, se eripuit, which is an idiom in Latin, once again, that means he... could we say he escaped? I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit too free. He rescued himself, or he took himself away, literally, is what se eripuit means. Let me just double check really quickly. Would they take that maybe? I don't know. I guess we couldn't really say escaped. He rescued himself. How about that? He saved himself. Ne causam dicaret. This is a purpose clause, but it's stated in the negative. Through them, he saved himself so that he would not plead the case. Okay? Because obviously if you show up at a trial and, just think about a court proceeding and all of a sudden like 10,000 people try and get in there, you're going to have like mass chaos and pandemonium, and so Orgetorix made his getaway. Now, moving on. Cum civitas ob eam rem encitata armis ius suum exequi conaretur multitudinemque hominum ex agris magistratus cogerent, Orgetorix mortuus est. Neque abest suspicio ut helvetii arbitrantur, quen ipse sibi mortem consciverit. Wow, Orgetorix mortuus est? What? It's kind of anticlimactic. Okay, let's do that again. Cum civitas ob eam rem encitata armis ius suum exequi conaretur multitudinemque hominum ex agris magistratus cogerent, Orgetorix mortuus est. Neque abest suspicio ut helvetii arbitrantur, quid ipse sibi mortem consciverit. Okay, let's start with clauses. There are a couple. The first one, well, it starts here at cum and goes all the way to cogerent. And then next one is going to start here at ut and goes to arbitrantur. Prepositional phrases. We have ob, eam, rem, and ex agris. Now, any other prepositional phrases? Are there? I don't see any. So let's now move on to verbs. And in this circumstantial clause, our first verb is conaretur, and then our second verb is cogerent. Our main verb of the entire sentence, up to the semicolon, is mortuus est. And then after that, we've got a verb in ab est, arbitrantur, and also consciverit. And technically, this quen in Latin tends to introduce clauses as well, so we'll just stick some brackets there. Now, what looks nominative? Do we see any nominatives, subjects? Well, I would hope so. We've got civitas here. Any word that describes that? Encitata. All right. Any other words that maybe look nominative? Notice how civitas, by the way, that is singular, and as is conaretur, but cogerent is plural. So that means that the subject has to be plural. If we start here at que, kind of back up to multitudinem. Multitudinem, that's singular. Hominum, that's plural, but it's genitive plural. Ex agris is a prepositional phrase. Magistratus. So magistratus is going to have to be nominative plural here. It's a fourth declension noun. They have US's in quite a number of places, 4 different places, but here it's nominative plural. Okay, now who's the subject of the mortuus est, of the main verb? That'd be orgeterix. Subject of ab est is suspicio, and then helvetii, that's another nominative, and ipse is also nominative. Okay, do we see any accusative words now? We have jus suum, multitudinem, and mortem. And there really aren't that many words left, and looking at those words, there is one that we should mark. There are 2, actually. First of all, there should be a long mark over this I, armies. That is ablative, plural. And the only other thing that I think we should mark is that there is an infinitive that I missed here, and that's exsequi. Exsequi. All right. So we've drawn ourselves the roadmap here, and let's start with the circumstantial clause. We always want to start a clause and finish it. So here it is. When the state, incitata, having been set in motion on account of this thing, that's ob eam rem. So when the state, on account of this thing, having been aroused or urged on armies with weapons, when the state or when the citizenry was trying to follow its own law, and magistrates were gathering a multitude of men from the fields, orgeterix died. Wow. Okay. So there it is. So when the state, on account of this thing, aroused or enkindled with weapons, was trying to follow its own law, and when the magistrates were gathering a crowd of men out of the fields, orgeterix died. And then neque ab est suspicio is kind of a strange thing to say. It literally means nor is suspicion lacking, which is kind of odd. So nor is suspicion lacking, as the Helvetians think, nor is suspicion lacking, but that he himself literally resolved upon death, or that he himself resolved upon death for himself. That's another idiom in Latin meaning committed suicide. So orgeterix died, and nor is the suspicion lacking, as the Helvetians think, but that he committed suicide. So, why would he commit suicide? I have no idea. That just sounds totally crazy to me. Who knows what happens? He is never heard from again, and Caesar just kind of doesn't really even want to inquire whether or not this is true. If orgeterix committed suicide, it seems highly unlikely that he committed suicide. He was probably assassinated by somebody at some point, but he's dead. But here's the interesting thing: in the next chapter, the Helvetians are going to think, maybe orgeterix's plan wasn't so bad. We should probably continue our migration plans anyway, even if they do involve kind of like, trying to conquer some other people. And how does that affect Rome? Well, one of the ways that the Helvetians are going to move to their new home in central Gaul is through the Roman province of Gaul, that tiny little strip of land. And Caesar's going to be like, oh no, buddy, I don't think so. All right.